This is the most relevant cartoon I could find for fundraising. Any of you have more than nothing? Yes? All right, good.
Austin is really becoming a well-respected tech hub, and Capital Factory is at the center of that.
We came in with this idea of like, we're going to start a company together because we start companies together.
There's so much going on here, and there's just the right mix of people here.
There's the right investors, the right employees, like there's the right peers.
The Capital Factory has events that run pretty much every day.
You know, our guys after the meeting are like, hey, by the way, if anybody's looking to hire, you know, come talk to us. No, actually, come over to our office. It's another 40 feet here.
The entire growth of your startup to probably your first 20 employees is contained within the Capital Factory.
So whatever you're recruiting for, whatever tech stack or platform or hardware or software, or even 3D printing now, there's almost always those people coming to your office on a day-to-day basis. And you just sit around at nighttime, they'll probably give you free pizza and beer.
And you want to demo your product after the event. Well, you're here at Capital Factory.
One of the coolest meetups that I've been to at Capital Factory is the Women at Austin meetup, because I was able to network with other women entrepreneurs.
Working with other people who are in the same spot as you were there 6 months ago or going to be there 6 months from now is really cool.
The entire atmosphere is wonderful. The meeting rooms that you can reserve.
Here's a really good office environment that we take care of everything. Oh, by the way, there's free snacks. Oh, by the way, there's this managed conference room situation.
But one of the best resources here at Capital Factory is the office hours.
The Capital Factory Mentor Network is now so big, and the number of people in almost every industry vertical, they're there now. And most of those guys are entrepreneurs themselves.
And you meet mentors, you meet other entrepreneurs. Like for us in particular, I met my co-founder here.
I met my co-founder up here.
There's just a real critical mass down here.
Our developers went to one of the development meetups and we met our newest developer, Kyle, there. And we hired him.
The Capital Factory was with us for 2 years of going from that sort of ambition to the actual reality of having a successful company with like a significant amount of money raised and like a high functioning team.
You know, technology is just as much about community as anything else.
You become part of this national family of people.
All right, welcome everybody. I think that's everybody coming in. I just took a picture. I'm gonna post this to Twitter, and I can tag I think 9 people. So, if you guys want to shout out your Twitter names, I can tag you in this.
At Randall Product.
Randall what?
Product.
Product. With two L's?
Correct.
At Renovate Simply.
Simply.
Firebelly HQ.
Say it again?
Firebelly
Firebelly.
HQ.
Just hearing the names is part of the best part of all this. Firebelly HQ. Firebelly.
Yeah.
HQ. Not coming up.
Oh no.
You can look into that.
You can skip it.
Any others?
At I pledge. No, EIPLEDG.
E-G. Wait, I-P-L-E.
IPLEDG.
D-G. I pledge.
Trev McKendrick.
Wait, with no E at the end?
No E.
Got it.
Trev TREV. McKendrick MCKENDRICK.
Got it. One more.
Karen, Karyn _Texberg.
Texberg.
TXBERG.
Oh. Is that like an iceberg?
Texas.
Texas size? Oh, bourbon.
It's Elysia, ELISIA, and then Denton, DENTON. All one word.
Got it. Any others?
ASYD Solutions.
One more. Anybody? Chelsea.
CELIZ.
I got you. All right. Thanks. Well, I just tweeted that out. If you guys want to hear anything useful today or want to share it, those are our Twitter things. We'd appreciate you sharing it out with other people too. So this is how to meet angel investors, or build intro to angel investing, or intro to fundraising. I've tried to distill that down a little bit more, and so this is specifically how to meet angel investors, which is what I think most of the people that come in wanting to learn about fundraising are most interested in. That's kind of the first part. And so what we're going to do today is I'm going to give a brief introduction, probably about 15-20 minutes, cover the basics of what you can find online already, separate from what's here, and what kind of steps that I think you should take, and what most people I see take for fundraising and for meeting investors. And then I've got Gordon Doherty here, who's one of the other Capital Factory directors and an entrepreneur and an angel investor, and we'll at that point open it up for kind of open Q&A or ask me anything, which is usually obviously always the best part. You guys can ask whatever questions about any topics you want, whether it's about anything around fundraising or term sheets or specific people or your own company, things you're going through, or anything like that. So as I go through all this, you can find all this information online, as you'd expect with most things on the internet. The kind of big top level link for all of these types of programming that we do here is atxstartupscene.com. The presentation itself was just posted on slideshare.net. And then there's also, this gets recorded. This is being streamed right now. There's a camera on the ceiling, and so this gets streamed over the internet and then recorded and posted on our YouTube channel at Austin Tech Live. And there's also, you can see a bunch of other previous ones of these, and sometimes ones with other venture capitalists that are guests or other people answering questions. So even the same presentation sometimes is worth seeing more than once because it's got other different people that are giving it or different people answering questions. So first, before I go into any of my own suggestions, there's a lot of people that are smarter than me that have written lots of great stuff already, and so this is I think are some of the best posts out there about fundraising. Paul Graham, founder of Y Combinator, has a great post that I think really kind of sums things up in general as far as how fundraising works. Venture Hacks is a blog put together by the people that created AngelList. It was actually kind of like the beta version of AngelList. They've got a lot of great content there. This VC economics post is interesting because it explains how the VC's business model works. And so if you're trying to go ask VCs for money, it's pretty useful if you can understand how they're thinking about it, because it's probably not the way you think they're thinking about it. Recently, Sam Altman, who's the current president of Y Combinator, did a Stanford class on fundraising, or on startups in general, and there was a really good interview that has Mark Andreessen, the founder of Netscape, and Ron Conway, and other people in it, so that's linked up there. And then also, he recently put together an online kind of mini ebook called this startup playbook, which is also really helpful. So those are some really good books online. They cover a lot of different things, but obviously all of them cover fundraising as a big part of it. Again, all of these are linked from this top. The SlideShare link has all the links in here in slides, so you can find all that from there. If you want to get a little deeper than just blog posts, books I'd recommend. Get Backed was just recently published by two Austin entrepreneurs, Evan Baer and Evan Loomis. It's a really great book. In particular, it has a lot of kind of pitch decks and example materials and things to look at. And they've raised a whole bunch of money, and they're both really, really smart. So that's a great book that's fairly new. Venture Deals by Brad Feld, who's one of the founders of Techstars and is a venture capitalist at Foundry Group. Has a book called Venture Deals, and it's also really, it's almost like the textbook for how the kind of venture industry works. So if you want to understand how VCs and fundraising, all this other stuff works, that's a great one. And then a good friend of mine, Matt Blumberg, is the CEO of a company called Return Path. He's widely regarded, I think, as one of the top CEOs that a lot of investors have ever met. He runs a great business. In particular, this Startup CEO Field Guide covers all kinds of things about being a CEO, but in particular covers the fundraising process and how to do that. So these are 3 books I'd check out if you want to go get some kind of more detailed information. So real quickly, what's different about fundraising in Austin? That's kind of the start. Again, you can find a lot of information on fundraising online. So if you're coming here, part of it's about about the differences of being here in Austin. And there's a bunch of different things. I'd say, first of all, that as much as we like to think that we're very special, a lot of the things that are different about fundraising in Austin are the same things that are different about fundraising anywhere that's not Silicon Valley. Like it's going to be, so it's not really that different actually, but it's what it really means is what's different about fundraising than fundraising in Silicon Valley. First of all, Austin's a bootstrap first kind of place. So what that means is you're expected to get something done on your own before people go give you a lot of money. And that's a general trend over the past 20 years as the cost of doing startups has dropped dramatically over that time period. It costs less money to do it, so you're expected to accomplish more before you get money. But also it's particularly a highlighted issue outside of Silicon Valley where investors are generally a little bit more cautious, and so they want to see some kind of traction, something that you've done or accomplished first before you get funding. One best way to show that traction and get something done is they're also very revenue focused, and so that leans heavily towards B2B businesses because B2B businesses generally have early revenue and paying customers. There are lots of consumer businesses that have revenue as well, so it doesn't rule those out. It makes it harder to do a consumer type business that's gonna, where your business plan is to go acquire lots of users for over a period of years before you ever go make any money, and before you test that part of the business and know whether you can make money. It's not impossible to do that, but it's going to be a lot harder. And with that, by harder, it means that the bars are going to be higher. You're going to have to show more traction, a stronger team, other things around it to be able to be successful with that and to get it funded. And also, they tend to favor experienced teams. So all these things are easier when you have people on the team that have gone and started companies before. That's not, on the one hand, that's not that helpful because you're like, okay, great. Well, if I haven't done that, so thanks. But you get to break some of those rules if you've gone and done it before. Maybe you don't have to show as much traction before you get funding, or you get a little more leeway on some other things. But this is a solvable problem. A lot of people look at this and think it's not. And you can improve your company by improving your team. It's actually one of the easiest ways to improve your company at the early stages very significantly. And so think about that as far as how you could recruit other people to join your team that might bring other experience, make you more credible, make it easier to get funding. So how do you meet angel investors? This is really just the basic stuff, but like almost meeting like it would be for meeting almost anybody in almost any situation, leverage your personal network first, because that's always going to be your best way to get an introduction. It's always best if somebody that knows you makes an introduction to somebody else that they know. Nothing ever beats that. That's going to have you come in a kind of like an open door where they're really receptive, and you've got a reference. That's always the best way to do it. And you might not have a big personal network, but it's usually a lot bigger than you think it is. And so you definitely need to put effort into that and really try to leverage it and go out and explore who you know and who the people that you know, the people that they know, and how you can get introduced into people that you want to meet. The next obvious thing is to go where the investors are, right? So figure out where are the places they're hanging out, what are the events that they're going to, what are the bars that they hang out at, what are the places they're going to be. This is one of those places, but going where those people are is another way that you're going to meet them and get to know them. Follow them on Twitter. Here's a Twitter list full of a bunch of Austin angel investors. I'll go over some specific ones as part of this presentation. But by following them on Twitter or social media or other places, you can get to know them a little bit and see what they're thinking about and what they're talking about, and maybe interact with them on a level that's not so kind of formal or confrontational, or not confrontational, but so kind of pressure as pitching them for a business, but get to know them by just having a conversation about some of the other things that they might be talking about. Create an AngelList profile. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but that's kind of a way to get yourself online where people can find you. There's a Facebook group called Austin Angel Investors. Just post your startup there and that you're fundraising. CTAN, which we'll talk more about, hosts office hours every month, and so that's a great opportunity to get in front of investors, get feedback, and meet some of them. We do an event here at Capital Factory every month called Epic Office Hours, which is another kind of big speed dating type office hours event where you can meet mentors and angel investors. A lot of people apply for an accelerator because they want to meet angel investors and venture capitalists. That's part of why a lot of people go through an accelerator, is to get those kinds of introductions. And then to participate in these kind of pitch events and competitions and things like that. I actually put that last because as much as the pitch event is designed to help you get in front of investors, I actually think very few investors go to pitch events to meet startups. Like, they usually are trying to meet them before that. So it's not like it's more about getting kind of press and publicity and other things like that, but it is one way to go meet them as well. And so what actually happens? How do you get started? Okay, I'm ready, I've got my startup, I want to go meet some angel investors, right? So one, what I said before, go read all that stuff, because you're going to look like an idiot if you don't read all that stuff and you go start reaching out to investors, because lots of people reach out to them and all this stuff's online and they know that stuff's online, and if you don't take the time to go do your basic homework and read the stuff online, you're going to say some really naive things and do some really naive things that are going to just aren't going to make you look impressive to the investors you're talking to. So go do your homework, make sure you kind of know the basic stuff before you start reaching out to them. And then you basically make a short overview. These are the days of kind of business plans are pretty much over. If you're going to go open a franchise of something, you might create a business plan, but no one's going to read your business plan, so I wouldn't take the time to write it. If you send a 40-page presentation to an investor, they're not going to read it. So you're really looking for a 1 to 2 page overview that's going to cover a bunch of key points. And in many ways, this is going to mirror what your angel list profile would be like, because they ask you a lot of those same questions to create your angel list profile, but really looking at who's on the team, what's the thing you're building, what's the product, and traction. What kind of progress have you made? What kind of customers do you have? How's it working? And then typically you're going to go find someone to talk to first that's somewhat of a friendly, right? You want to find someone you can talk to that's going to give you some advice that's not going to kind of eat you alive, right? And so you want to find some friendly angel investor or another entrepreneur or someone else that you can go talk to and basically go over that pitch with them and practice it, or that 1-pager or 2-pager, get their feedback, iterate on it, and then out of that, put together a real pitch deck or a real kind of 1 to 2-pager, and get lots of feedback from people that you know about that to kind of iterate on it. And then you go start talking to people. This part is the part that can go really fast or take a really long time, but you're, one way or another, you got to talk to lots of people until you get somebody to say yes, and you get your first few angel investors. Most of the time that happens on a convertible note with most tech startups, in general, and certainly here in Austin. So you're typically, these days, you're not building up towards like what they would call like one big closing. It's not like everybody wires the money on the same day. It's much more common that like you find your first investor and they give you a check for $25,000 and you start going, and then a few weeks later someone else gives you a check for $25,000, and it kind of builds up over a period of time, and at some point there is a closing. You might apply to an accelerator as another way to meet angel investors, and then again, every business is different, but I'm just trying to give you some kind of like what's the most common thing that we see. Typically in your seed round, is what you'd call this, you're raising anywhere from $500,000 to $1.5 million on a convertible note usually, and usually in a bunch of small chunks from angel investors and angel groups. Maybe a VC participates in that. Typically if they do, they're putting in $250,000 or a few $100,000 of that bigger chunk, and you're raising the rest from angel investors and other people. And then you kind of prove some things with that, show that you have something that's ready to scale, and then at that point you'd go raise a more traditional Series A of a few $1 million from a more traditional VC. And that's kind of just the general path. If you can skip steps, it's great. Lots of people try to skip steps, and that's awesome if you can. If you can immediately go out and pitch, you've got a great team together with the right concept and the right idea, and you've got right relationships, and you can go pitch a VC and they write you a $10 million check on day one, like that's awesome, go do that. Most people can't do that. I know like 2 people in Austin this year that will do that. And then most people are gonna do this. So I said follow people on Twitter. Here are just some of the people I would follow on Twitter that I think are both great angel investors and are active and people you could respond to or interact with. Melly Price is a director here and a great entrepreneur and angel investor. Joel Trammell, the American CEO, he multiple serial entrepreneur, worked with Gordon on one of his businesses, and really great entrepreneur, writes a lot of great content, writes about leadership and about management, so lots of things to interact with. Brett Hurt is founder of a bunch of different companies, Bizarre Voice, Coremetrics. Now he's got a new stealth company he's working on. He's one of the ones who can just go announce he's doing a company and VCs will just throw millions of dollars at him, which you get to do after you do a bunch of companies. And Andrew Busey, Dan Graham, Clayton Christopher founded Sweet Leaf Tea and Deep Eddy Vodka. Dan Graham was Build a Sign. Andrew Busey's done a whole bunch of companies. Sean Abood is fairly new to Austin, but really active angel investor. Craig Cummings was one of the founders of Ride Scout and has a small angel fund and is a great entrepreneur and angel investor. Chris Schonk is another early stage investor here in town who has a small fund. So those are some of the people that I would go check out. And then that Twitter list that I mentioned at the beginning has a whole bunch more. So you can just watch that list and you'll see all kinds of angel investors, and you kind of want to interact with any of them. Then there's CTAN, the Central Texas Angel Network. CTAN's an angel group, so it's a big group of angel investors that all kind of do deals together. The idea for them is that they're kind of leveraging each other for due diligence, that they're instead of each analyzing the deal by themselves, they analyze it as a group, so they get to leverage each other's expertise. It's more of a process as opposed to like one person making decisions on their own. You kind of go through a big application and they narrow it down, and then a certain number of companies come in and pitch, and then they narrow it down some more, and then a certain number of other companies come in and pitch, and they narrow it down some more. So you can kind of go through that process. We're really lucky to have them here in Austin. They're one of the most active angel groups in the country. They don't just do tech, they do all kinds of different businesses, and they have an application cycle about every other month where you can apply. And then I said before, they have office hours every month. So that's another great resource here in Austin. I also mentioned AngelList. AngelList is basically an online marketplace for startups to meet angel investors. And so you go on there and kind of like LinkedIn, where you'd make a profile for yourself, you make a profile for your company, and it goes through obviously what your business is and who's on the team and what kind of traction you have and other things like that. It's also useful for hiring, but then through that, investors can find you and you can find investors. It's a really great resource. I used it myself for my last company to raise, I think, $3 or $4 million from investors on both coasts. And since then, I've helped other companies here in Austin to raise tens of millions of dollars through that. It's been a great resource. And we have Austin companies that have gotten investors from Belgium and from to random other places for hundreds of thousands of dollars that just met them online and made an investment. And they flew here and met them afterwards and things like that. But it's really an effective tool. Another great resource is office hours. Different groups do this in different ways. Usually, though, it's some type of a speed dating type event where there's 10 to 20 or 30 angel investors in the room, and then a whole bunch of entrepreneurs. And every 5 minutes or every 10 minutes, they ring a bell and you swap seats. So through that, you get to meet a whole bunch of different people. And that's a great way to meet people. Keep it kind of low pressure. The idea is not to go pitch them hard while you're there in your 5 or 10 minutes that you have with them, but more to meet them, get some feedback, have them learn about what you're doing, and try to see if there's anybody that you really kind of connect with that you might want to follow up with more later. So like I was saying, you don't want to, you think of it as dating, not falling in love. You're not expecting them to commit on the first date. And as much as you can, you want to do your homework for that beforehand too. Know who it is you're going to meet with, know what their background is, know what they might be able to help you with, and things like that. And the big ask is to get a follow-up meeting. That's rather than saying are you interested in investing, just be like, hey, would you want to get together and talk about this more? If they don't want to get together and talk about it more, they're definitely not interested in investing. So that's a good litmus for testing that. Accelerators. So here are some of the different accelerators here in Austin, and my own kind of back of that napkin math on comparing them. It's hard to compare them because they work in different ways. So I tried to just and they kind of call things different things. I tried to summarize what's the actual amount of money that you end up getting, and then what's the actual amount of equity you give up for that amount of money, inclusive of everything else you're giving up. And so this is not exactly right necessarily for any one company, but I think this is a pretty good average of about how it works out. So you can see a bunch of different options that we have here. You'll find that each of these things tend to focus in different areas. So we have Athena Health that's focused on obviously companies that sell into doctors' practices and things like that. Capital Factory and Techstars both focused on tech. International focused on bringing international companies here to Austin. SKU, which is focused on consumer packaged goods and things like that. Unlimited, which is a social good group. So lots of different options in different ways, and they tend to have different cycles. Most of them run once or twice a year. Capital Factory runs every month. We run all year round, but most of them have some kind of a defined cycle. So one of the things as soon as you start talking to investors, you're going to get asked about is valuation, which is what's my company worth? Your general theory is you want the valuation to be as high as possible so that you're giving up as little of the company as you can, and the investors want the valuation to be as low as possible so they're getting as much of the company as they can. At the beginning, when you're just getting started, even if you have a little bit of traction, whatever it is, it's bullshit. There's no reason why you're actually worth millions of dollars. You're not. But you have to start somewhere. And so that you have to start somewhere tends to be around $3 million. Sometimes it's $2 million, sometimes it's $1 million. It's usually around 3, sometimes it's 4. You're going to get a higher valuation because you have a more experienced team, things like that. Often this is going to be on a convertible note, and the note will have what's called a cap on the note, and that's basically equivalent to having a valuation. From all practical purposes, that's the way it works out. Also, you'll get to have a higher valuation just because you need more money, which also doesn't sound like it makes a lot of sense. But again, they have to make the math work out on the company, and so if you're doing something that's very capital intensive that requires a lot of money to build a business, you're going to get a higher valuation to start, because otherwise it just doesn't work. And the easy rule of thumb as you're talking about it is if you're arguing with angel investors about your valuation, it's too high. Like that should not be the argument. The argument should be whether or not they want to invest in your company. Like that should be the case you're making. And once they decide they want to invest, the valuation should be something they look at and be like, oh yeah, of course, that sounds great. And if it's not, you probably have it too high. The way you get to play them against each other is when you have multiple people bidding, and that's where you get to push it up, is because multiple people want it, and then you can play them against each other a bit. But at the beginning, which for most of the startups that I talk to, they don't have a whole bunch of people, that they're not oversubscribed with all these different people want to give them money. They're trying to find someone to give them money. And so in those cases, yeah, you don't want to be arguing about the price. Also, it usually takes longer than people think. So most people think like, oh yeah, I'm gonna get some meetings, and of course in a couple weeks, I'm gonna have a couple $100,000. Sometimes it happens that fast. It usually doesn't. Usually it takes a couple weeks to get meetings with people, and then like you meet with them once, and then they want to meet with you again in a couple weeks. And so, and like I said before, often it's not like all at once. You meet different investors at different times, and you get a little bit of money here, and then you wait a little bit longer, and you get a little bit of money there. It's not ideal. It's not very much fun. You kind of like, it'd be much nicer to get a big check and then not have to worry about running out of money. But this is much more commonly how it works out. And through all that, you have to really get used to hearing no. It's one of those things like, and typically you're going to talk to a lot of angel investors before you get a yes. And all you really need to, at the beginning is just 1 or 2 people to say yes. You don't need that many. But it might take 50 conversations to make that happen. And that's going to feel like a lot. It's going to suck. It's not fun. So get used to hearing no and be ready to keep plowing on until somebody tells you yes, and try to listen to it, learn from it, and keep tweaking what you're doing. Easiest way to impress angel investors that you're talking to. Sounds pretty simple. It's a lot harder to do than it is to say. But it's just to say you're going to do something and then do it. Which means to meet with them, say, here's what I'm going to do over the next month. I'm going to focus on this, this, and this. I'm going to try to accomplish this. I'm going to try to sell this. I'm going to build this. And then come back to them a month later and say, hey, remember I met with you last month? Here's what I said I was going to do. I said I was going to do this, this, and this. Here's what I did. I did this, this, and this. Here's what I learned. This worked. This didn't work. Here's how I wasn't able to get this done. I was able to get this done. It's super hard as a startup to predict anything. Anything. Like you have, like it seems like it wouldn't be. It's so hard just to predict what's going to happen over the next few weeks, or what you're going to get done, or who you're going to meet, or what you're going to close, what deals are going to close. It's really, really hard to do that, and it's hard to do that in a big business, but it's harder in a small business because things aren't well defined, and you don't have a lot of history, and you don't have a lot of data. It's really, really hard to do that. So if you can do that, that's actually really impressive. Like that's going to instill a great amount of confidence in investors to have you come in. Like you do that like 2 or 3 times in a row, then the next thing you say, they're going to believe it. They're going to think like, yeah, whatever he does what he says he's going to do, or she does what she says she's going to do. Like this is what's going to happen. So I'm not saying you should sandbag it, and but a lot of entrepreneurs have an instinct to overpromise. Like they feel like they need to promise too much, and I would actually tone it back because they're going to be much more impressed by you just being able to predict anything about what's going to happen. There's a great investor in LA I like. His name is Mark Sister, and he had this blog post he wrote, and his way of saying this is that he likes to invest in lines, not dots. So a dot is one point in time, and you might know where you are right now, but you don't really know where you're going. And to know where you're going, you need to have multiple data points. I need to meet you here, and meet you a few weeks later, and meet you a few weeks later, and now I can draw a line, and I can see where you're headed. And so that takes time. And so again, with a lot of entrepreneurs come in and they think, wow, I'm going to raise money. I've got 2 months runway. I need to meet investors. I need to get some money really fast. It's hard to do that because most investors want to get to know you over a period of a few months before they go give you a bunch of money. Not all, but most. And so that's just one of the challenges you got to work with. So I don't know why that's doing that. That's not supposed to show those slides. That is the quick intro. And now I'd love to invite Gordon up. Gordon Doherty was an entrepreneur. He's been an executive at a bunch of big companies here in Austin and other places. And he's a very active and experienced angel investor too. He's one of the directors here at Capital Factory that helps run our accelerator. And so just another great person to answer questions. He works with tons of startups every day, and sees what they're going through and helps them navigate those. And he's also made a lot of investments himself. I think we're pretty good on time. That was just about right.
So when does the next accelerator program start?
Every month.
Yeah.
we have a cycle. We're doing interviews later this week for folks that applied during the month of December. We have another cycle, roughly the beginning of every month. We run interviews. So we do info sessions every Tuesday afternoon. It is, Josh? Info sessions about the accelerator. It's in the afternoon. You'll see it on the Capital Factory calendar if you look at where the schedule is. You can come to one of those info sessions if you want to learn more about it. So the cool thing is, we have a cycle every month. So we're either meeting them, interviewing them, accepting them, or onboarding them every month.
How often do you accept people without revenue?
Happens every once in a while, but our kind of specialty is for companies that have a product and a customer is what we say. Josh mentioned some of the other accelerators that are kind of optimized for the idea phase. So we will sometimes accept startups that don't yet have revenue, but it's a little bit of an exception case. There are cases like hardware companies that need help and money earlier before they can launch their product, and just other cases that would be exception. But as a general rule, our startups that come in have a product and a customer.
So if you have products and customers and no revenue, able to show that?
I'd say
users. I should products and users.
I'd say a customer that is not providing revenue is a user.
Yeah. Clarify that.
But it's like you said, it depends on the business,
Right.
So we have a company that's, in the healthcare space selling software solutions to hospitals. Selling to hospitals is a really slow process. It takes a long time. And you have to get case studies and things like that. So they had they had like 2 hospitals that wanted to use it and were signed up and had some good case studies, and that made sense for them at the stage that they were at. That was enough to say okay, we should go do that. Like I said, with hardware, it can be different, although these days there's Kickstarters and other ways where you can go show a lot of demand, and having a successful Kickstarter is a great way to show traction and come in, and that's having customers and revenue, even if you didn't build anything yet. That's great. And it would, like I said, depend on different industries. Or if it's a game, you might not have any revenue, but now, like I mentioned in some of the other comments, the bar is gonna be higher. We're really gonna be looking at kind of usage and retention and activity and things like that.
Get to know us. I'd say it's easiest for us to just have a quick conversation, and we can help guide you. Yeah.
Can you say on the healthcare software for a second, besides Athena Health, and where in Austin, where's the place, where are the top 2, 3 if you're doing healthcare software?
So first of all, just absolutely without question, this is the place. Much more, in some ways, much more so than Athena Health. Athena Health is great, but they're actually only working with a small number of companies, 2 or 3 at a time. And so that's actually our largest vertical here. So with the 150 companies that we're investing in or working with, and there's kind of 400 or 500 companies that work here, our 10% of us is bigger than anything else here. So we have probably 20 healthcare companies here at least. And a lot that we're working with. Of the inbound companies that we're working with, it's probably 10 to 15%, which makes it one of the biggest kind of verticals coming in. Education would be another really big one for us, I'd say. But yeah, we see a lot going on there. We have a bunch of stuff going on in digital medical records, a bunch of stuff going on in remote presence, telemedicine, and then other types of services to hospitals, personal medicine, kind of wearables for what's the word I want?
Hydration
or that, or just general kind of measuring stuff by yourself. Biometrics, yeah. Like that. So, did I answer your question?
Yeah.
But then, sorry. So that was the selfish answer. So this was, you said what was the place? This is the place. Other places. So we've got the new Dell Medical School right there. So they're going to have more and more stuff going on. There's not really much happening yet. The other types of programs typically have health components to what they do. So Unlimited is the social good one, and they had one of our, we shared a company that was a digital medical records company that was also going through that as well. And then Techstars, out of their 10 companies they do a year, there'll be 1 or 2 of those that are typically, almost always are health related in some kind of way or something like that. So it's happening all over the place, but as far as having a density or a focus, it would probably be Athena or here.
Who pays for Capital Factory? Angel investors, success stories, some of both?
Who pays for what?
The Capital Factory.
What do you mean by that?
Who pays the bills, who pays your salary, what pays for all of this?
Man, I hope we get a salary.
No.
That'd be nice.
Somebody's paying the rent, failing all of
Yeah, so that's a great question. So Capital Factory is itself is a pretty large organization, And so internally, we kind of think about it primarily as two main businesses. One is this co-working space, which is its own LLC or own business. That's a cash business that has to pay the rent every month, and we pay the rent here from all the companies here that pay rent. And so it's a really simple. We're not subsidized by the city or by anybody else. There's no big VC fund that pays for everyone to be here. Like, we're a community, and everybody here supports the community. The mentors help support the community as well. They actually make a donation to help support the community as part of being a mentor. But it's a completely kind of grassroots. We're a bootstrapped company, but it was made out of a bunch of people putting it together. And there are investors in that, and so but many of the mentors had to invest some money to open the space. But it's really supported by the people that are here. And we also have a bunch of corporate sponsors, so Google and Dell and British Airways and BBVA and Microsoft and Amazon and all these others also contribute in different ways, financially and otherwise, to help support that. And then we have the accelerator and the fund, which is where we are basically investing in companies, taking equity in companies, and then helping them to raise money. And that is a pool of about 150 mentors who are all here in Austin, who again actually all pay a fee to be part of that. So it's not that they're not getting paid. And so they help support that. They also all invest into this fund, which is what matches the investments made by the different mentors as well. And so that's really we think of that really as a community-driven, kind of pay-it-forward kind of fund of the entrepreneurs in Austin, helping to support other entrepreneurs. And then Gordon and I don't get paid. We don't get a salary or anything like that. Like, I'm here every day, he's here most days. We're investors, and so in the fund, we're some of the biggest investors in the fund. And so we'll make money as we invest in companies, and then we get what's called a carry on the fund. So because we're basically managing the fund for all those other people. So someday, 5 or 10 years from now, assuming we make a bunch of money off the fund and all the companies that are here, we should get paid. But right now we're paying, we're not getting paid. So.
What are some of the things you should look for when you're vetting an investor?
I'm gonna answer the question in the context of seed round with angel investors, okay? Because it's different when you think about an angel investor in a seed round versus maybe a professional investor like a VC in a Series A or B. And that's because the startups in their seed round, they need more than just money, they need help. And VCs do help. So when you go raise a Series A, you're gonna apply some of these same characteristics. But in the case of a seed round with angel investors, many angel investors are actually motivated not just by the return on investment opportunity they have with their money, but it's also to get active with entrepreneurs and startup ventures that they feel like they can truly help. People like me and others that have had some fortunate events throughout their career and able to put some money back into the market, well, actually, I'm half or more motivated by what I do in helping startups and attaching myself to them in some way. So it's a long answer to, I think you have an opportunity when you're doing your seed round with angel investors to size them up as to how can they help you. Most of them will want to, and you'll want to find out what kind of help is that. Is that their expertise? Is it introductions? Do they know your industry? Do they know your product category? Have they been through this before? So I've really sized them up to a large degree. You will find some angel investors that will say that they're actually a passive investor. Maybe they're super involved with other parts of their portfolio, they really like what you're doing, or maybe they're following another angel investor into this investment and it's truly gonna be passive. But that's part of the dialogue that you'll have.
Yeah, I think there's the presumption here that you get to choose, and unfortunately, it's just the sad fact of life is most entrepreneurs, they're beggars, not choosers. They're like trying to find any angel investors they can, and the first one that agrees to write them a check, they take, because that lets them start working on their business. And I wish it wasn't like that, but I'm just saying that's 90% of the cases. I mean, that's the large majority of the cases is, can I find anyone to give me money? It's not, I'm not saying they don't get money. I'm just saying it ends up being great. I found one person, like, oh, I got one more, and they got one more, and they're just taking anybody they can get. When you get to have a choice is when you're a hot deal, right? And it's in demand, and especially if you're a more experienced entrepreneur, or you're showing a lot of traction, or you're in a space that's really hot and people are really interested in it, and then you get to be a little more picky. And in those cases, like Gordon said, the first thing I want is, I don't want just, we'd call it dumb money. I don't want just someone that's gonna write a check. I want someone where they're more valuable because of them, because they know a bunch about what I'm doing, or they have a bunch of relationships. Like maybe Like they run another business, and my business doesn't compete, but is gonna sell to the same customers. So they already have all these customer relationships, and they can just go walk me in the door to introduce me to customers. Or maybe they know a lot of other investors, and they can go, and having their name on it is gonna make other investors wanna invest, because that is actually how a lot of investors work. And so that's a reason I wanna get them involved. Or just I want someone I can talk to, because it's really hard, and it's very comforting to have someone I can go talk to that's kind of been through this before and actually was in my shoes and was at the beginning at a startup and has been through this and things like that. So that's kind of my first pick. And then there's like, what do you want to avoid? So what I want to avoid is, like, first of all, in general, if you have a choice, like you want to avoid inexperienced investors, because they can do things that are like a big pain in the ass and that eat up a lot of time or can actually mess with your company. And part of it, you're really, an investor is really like a partner, and they have to be you want to see it that way. It can't be like, you don't want it to be that their goal is to like extract as much value out of the company as they can for themselves. If they view it that way, it's not going to be a very good relationship. You want it to be that they view it as their goal is to help the company be as successful as it can, because they know they're going to make a lot of money. That's how they're going to make a lot of money. But it's not like optimizing on their piece. And if they're looking at it that way, it's not going to be a good relationship. It's not going to be great. And then because you're a startup, there are going to be things that are going to happen that you didn't expect, and and hopefully lots of good things, but probably some bad things too. And having good investors that see that big picture means that when something comes along that you don't expect, like they can like work with you on it. Like a lot of times you might agree to a set of terms at the beginning, and a lot of times you got to go back and change the terms later, because like things didn't work out quite the way you expected. And it doesn't mean everything's going to fail, but sometimes you just got to go back to your investors and you're like, hey, you know what? That plan we came up with like didn't quite work right. So we can all like lose all our money, or we can like come up with a new plan. And like here's the new plan, and you want to have investors that are going to like be on board with that. Like be like, okay, great, like let's come up with a new plan, as opposed to like fighting about how I want, I don't know what it is, but they basically drive the company into the ground, trying to protect their own interests. So there's a long answer, but I think that's kind of a trade-off. If you have the pick, I want a really experienced entrepreneur who's going to add a lot of value. And if there's anybody to avoid, it would be a really inexperienced investor that might make bad decisions. Or let me give you two more examples too. Another one is so family, in general you want to avoid. Like again, sometimes that's your only choice, but family can be very unreasonable and also just put you in a situation like you don't ever want to be in a situation where like if you lose somebody's money that they feel really bad about it or you feel really bad about it. You don't want to feel good about it. I'm not saying you're like you do want to feel bad if you lose somebody's money, but like they're an investor, like they should be investing because they know that they can lose their money. And like a lot of family might not actually understand that when they do it. And then you lose the money and then you can't go to Thanksgiving dinner anymore. And so that's why you want to be aware of that. And then the last thing is investors who can be like a big pain in the ass. And this is like a great example of this is I'm an investor in a restaurant. I'm in a couple restaurants, but one of the ones I'm in, something was happening, and overall the business was doing really well. Like they beat their projections, and like we're all getting paid good money, distributions from the business, and another friend of mine who, I don't think he was trying to do anything wrong, but just wasn't that experienced an investor. And he looked at something on the books and he said, I don't think this is quite adding up right. Like I feel like it's not, it's something he didn't like. And he's like, in our contract it says that as an investor we can ask for an audit. And we can, audit the books and see if they're paying us what they're supposed to. Like, I think maybe I should ask them for an audit. What do you think? And he's like, and I'm just like, he's like, well, that's what the contract says. I can do that, right? And like thinking like it's not a big deal. And I'm just like, oh my God, that's like declaring war on the company. Like if you do that, you're gonna really piss off the people running the company and the people who are running. It's a big pain in the ass to do an audit. Like it's gonna take a bunch of their time, and it's actually gonna cost the company a bunch of money to go do that. So like, don't do that unless like you really think something's wrong. Like, and you really need to protect, because otherwise you're really just causing a bunch of problems, And like, so that's like an experienced investor thing. He wasn't a bad person. He wasn't trying to do anything wrong. It was in his rights to do that. But like, he didn't understand what the implication was for the rest of the business, and what that he was gonna, that it literally was like, I mean, that is like declaring war. That's like I think you're cheating me, you know, like go audit the business. Anyways, long answer, but those are some of the things you look for and why ideally you'd have an experienced investor.
Yeah, I have a question. So as you mentioned, the cost of doing startup are decreasing and more and more people come to this space. So how would you describe the overall ecosystem now for people who investing and doing a startup? And just say how this ecosystem will be affected by economic downturns, like ups and downs, how it goes through these cycles?
It is true that one of the downsides of it being so easy to start a business is if you're starting a fairly simple business that doesn't require a lot of money, you'll have a lot of competition. I mean, there's somebody working on almost every idea that you have here is probably being worked on in some form or fashion in other parts of the country. It's just not very expensive to start a business. And there's also a lot of young entrepreneurs that want to jump into business. So they're like, 20 years ago, there weren't that many people that even wanted to do this crazy stuff. Now there's a lot of people that want to, right? So you just have this super competitive environment. So that does mean pretty good ideas, even really good ideas, can have trouble getting funded because I get a lot of there's more good ideas that I have opportunities to invest in than I possibly have money, right? So I can meet with you and I can really like your idea, but I just have to like his idea a little bit better than your idea, honestly, and I invest a certain amount of money. And so there is that scarcity of resource that there's not a lot you can do about, but what you try and do about that, this is why Josh, what he talked about was evidencing traction of some sort. And a lot of people, when they think about showing the traction they're having with their ideas, means they have to have paying customers. But the truth is there's a lot of things that you can do to evidence traction before you have your first paying customer. Can you convince 4 or 5 other people to join your venture, maybe for 0 cash and only equity? And now what you're showing me, the traction you're showing me, is that your idea is attractive enough to a few other dreamers to jump on board with you for no compensation. Okay, that shows me something. And
it shows you can sell.
And you can sell them on that idea, that's true. Can you convince a guy like Josh or others, experienced mentors in town that are very well sought after, to join you as an advisor? Okay, that shows that, because again, Josh and I and others get a lot of requests to be advisors, so we have to be very limited, right? So if you can do that with somebody that has relevant experience that I can look at and go, wow, she got him to sign on as an investor, that's traction. Can you get a blogger or a pundit in your industry to write something about what you're working on? Now that shows external validation from somebody. So, there are 28 ways that you can evidence to me that you have traction. And so what I tell people in this competitive environment where if it was easy for you to start it up, it's easy for anybody to start it up. Try and do those kinds of things because it'll differentiate you from a whole bunch of others that are working on the same thing and they're not doing those kind of things. Make sense?
Yeah, the thing I'd add is just that, your question of if there's an economic downturn, does it make it harder? It makes it harder for weaker businesses, and I think it makes it easier for stronger businesses.
Well, it does make it harder, if I could add.
Yeah.
And there was an article just in today's journal about how the whole pipeline is kind of backed up because the IPOs have slowed down. The exits that the VCs look for to exit out of their investments have slowed down dramatically from 2013 to 2014 to 15. As a result, they've got a fuller pipeline of existing companies that they have to keep funding because they're not ready to make an exit, which means that the angel investors have less exits because we make investments in companies hoping to turn them over to VCs. So that pipeline is kind of full. That doesn't mean it's going to stop. It just means it's going to take a little longer. To I think Josh's point about 6 to 12 months to raise angel money, I think everybody's seeing it's just taking longer to move up the pipeline.
So as part of that, when I said harder for weaker companies and easier for better companies. So if you're a weaker company, there is less money available, and it's more competitive. If you're a stronger company, it means that there are fewer other companies getting funded. It means that when you're trying to hire people, there's fewer other people competing for those people. And when there's less money in the market, everybody starts overpaying for everything, which drives up the cost of all those things and actually makes it much harder for you. And so there's a bunch of reasons why actually it might be easier. We started Capital Factory in 2009, right after the 2008 market crash, and a big part of the emotional momentum behind it was, this is the best time to start companies. We're at a local minimum. There's nowhere to go but up from here. Like the market's gonna go up, we're gonna be in a rising tide economy, things are gonna get better, there's gonna be more opportunity, and there's not a lot of competition right now.
By the way, if you have one of these great companies that's growing fast and things, the capital markets shrink up, let's say, and angel investors don't want to invest and the VCs don't want to invest, those companies actually are just one downshift of a gear from getting to where they can maybe survive for a while. But maybe you had 6 months of runway, and that's because you were using it to grow fast. Downshift one gear, and maybe you can last a year. These other companies that are kind of struggling and not growing that much, they don't have that option. So this is why these good, solid companies on an initial good growth track record can actually tread water for a lot longer if need be.
While the competition falls away.
Exactly.
Another thing I want to mention there too is that almost everything that's reporting on this or tracking it is looking at the traditional metrics that we have available and comparing it to historicals. And I think that that's in some ways missing a big part of the picture because the market has dramatically changed over the past 5 to 10 years because of crowdfunding and customer funding and things like that. And so that with the cost of doing companies dropping so dramatically, there are more and more businesses that don't ever need to get venture-backed funding, that can become a viable business on just an angel round, on smaller amounts of funding, and then also, or on no funding, but through Kickstarter and things like that, through crowdfunding, through equity crowdfunding, through customer crowdfunding. And those, I think, just don't show up in these charts. Those companies, almost like they're being counted as if they don't exist, and I think those are going to become viable companies. Those are alternative ways that you can raise money as these other things start to happen. And I think that's, in general, I feel like, I've been doing this for about 20 years as far as work with startups and working with startups, and it's hard for me to say it's not the best it's ever been. I mean, just as far as opportunity, as far as ease of creating a company, of acquiring funding, of reaching people, of growing your business. I feel like it's the easiest and the best it's ever been.
Do you have any comments on legal? So, how getting structured, I guess that you said, get your first investor and have a sort of rolling close, but then, if you get a $25,000 check, you gotta do documents, and maybe you can give a little insight on how,
so the really simple thing is you want to create a Delaware C Corp, which you can go online and do for $300. People can come up with different explanations why you might do something else. Don't do anything else. Just go do that. Everything else is like something that's designed to save you a very small amount of money and will create a big pain in the ass later. Just create a Delaware C Corp. That's what if you plan on raising money. Create a Delaware C Corp. It costs a couple $100s. Then you raise money on a convertible note, which doesn't require you doing most of those other things. And it makes the documentation much simpler, and now you've really got pretty minimal paperwork. Almost everything you need to do that is available publicly for free. There's sample documents for the convertible note. There's, if you're part of this community, we give you the documents for the convertible note. The creating the company stuff is totally standardized. So that, again, there might be reasons why your business might be different or you're more sophisticated or whatever, but for most of the companies that we talk to, they all look pretty much the same at this stage, and they all should. It's almost an exact template for what that should be like, and all you're playing with is what's my valuation.
Right.
I guess to follow on from that, in Australia we don't promote to entrepreneurs to do a cookie cutter because we've had horror stories where either IP's gone insane or just kind of weird stuff. But we're not even as litigious as America. What's the justification? One of my questions was, do you have a lawyer in residence to, in a sense, offer advice to the entrepreneur of, what to be aware of when doing any kind of deals?
Yeah. So first of all, on the cookie cutter side, it's cookie cutter very favorable towards the entrepreneur.
Yeah.
So the cookie cutter part is it's a very entrepreneur favorable deal. And I think that allows it to be that way. And so the basic premise is if we all start with a very entrepreneur friendly deal, and then we're kind of in a good spot. So most of the templates that you'll find out there are very entrepreneur friendly, and I think that's what makes it safe to start with that for most companies. If you're going to be a very IP heavy company, you might want to look at that a little bit differently. Most of the companies we deal with here are not IP heavy. They built something out of a hackathon. you know, and like, not all of them, we got plenty that do have IP and otherwise, but I'm just saying, again, majority of them, more than 50% of them, there's not heavy IP behind it, and so it just doesn't apply to them. And then, as far as the templates and stuff, so one of the things with the mentor network here is we have a bunch of lawyers in the mentor network, and they are available to answer quick questions and things like that. We have template documents, like I said, for a bunch of these pieces. Like if you want an advisor agreement, you know, like you're signing up for it, like that's like we just have the standard advisor agreement, and that helps the advisors too. They don't want to have to go think about it or anything like that. They want to use the same advisor agreement everyone else is using. If you, the other thing is the mentors themselves. I mean, I want to be careful in saying this, like I'm not a lawyer, Gordon's not a lawyer, we can't officially give you legal advice. Most of those things you're going to ask about, I'd rather go ask one of the mentors about than a lawyer. I mean, you know, like it's because most of the time it's really a business issue that you're deciding, not a legal issue, which is, you know, the lawyers are most helpful in understanding what are the legal implications of this. Many times your legal questions are going to come down to business issues, and the mentor is going to be more helpful at helping to navigate the balance of the business issues.
I actually had a couple of questions. You talked about your accelerator program, and this is probably reflective of your criteria of selecting the people in the accelerator. What's the success rate of those people who come into the accelerator for of getting to the next level, or whatever you identify as success? And then the second question, not so much with the accelerators, but you talked about the crowdfunding. How many of the businesses here at Capital Factory have actually used some form of crowdfunding as part of their fundraising strategy?
Sure. Success rates, you can measure lots of different ways. It generally takes 5 to 10 years for a startup company to become a successful big company. I think most IPOs are 7 to 8, 9 years into the company's founding. Sometimes can happen faster, often can take longer. So we've been doing this for just over 5 years now. So we're just starting to see some of the very first companies we invested in becoming big companies that have raised tens of millions of dollars and are worth hundreds of millions of dollars. So some examples of that would be a company called Sparefoot that's right across the street, WP Engine.
And they went through the early accelerator program?
Sparefoot was one of the first company we did in the early part of the program. As far as the bulk, we really scaled up about 3 years ago, and so the bulk of the companies we've worked with have been the past 3 years. So those, again, some of the very companies we invested in 3 years ago, they've now raised $10 million, and they're worth 20, 30, 40 million dollars, right? And that's kind of like that next level success. There's a lot of them that have raised $500,000 or $1 million, and they're still kind of figuring their way through that. Of the companies that come into the accelerator program looking for the matching funds, about a third of them get the matching funds. Now, that does not mean that the other 2/3 fail. There's probably, I'd say, another less than a third, but close to a third, that don't continue to operate without the matching funds, bootstrap, get funding from other sources, do things other ways as well. This is one thing I can't just give you a number off the top of my head, but we should be able to should be how many companies have raised $1 million. I think that would be a good measure.
Yeah, we'll get that. We're doing our annual survey now, and so we'll get that.
Yeah.
And well, like Josh said, the other way to mention it is like comparing us to, let's call it failure rates, companies that dissolve. And we're proud of, we're 3 years in, but less than 10% of those 120 or 130 have gone to a path of having to dissolve the company. Now there's some number that are struggling and bumping along, but feels pretty good so far. Yeah.
And then with the crowdfunding, how many of the companies have actually used Kickstarter?
Certainly more and more, and we've certainly got a number that have raised millions of dollars with crowdfunding.
Yeah. You have to have that type of
5
offering.
to 10%.
Like there's certain offerings that you can't put out on Kickstarter.
Yeah.
And so that eliminates a lot of our companies are working on things that they couldn't put on Kickstarter. Now there's this new equity crowdfunding, kind of new rules on it. Definitely make sure you read up on that. I mean, some of the reporting requirements and the documentation and paperwork you have to do ahead of time is like a mini IPO, and then your obligations for kind of regular financial reporting are definitely more onerous than other ways, but it is a new avenue. We'll see what kind of success that has. Yeah.
But probably 10-20% at least are doing it, particularly through the equity crowdfunding as well. And what I'm certainly seeing is a bunch of companies that go and they just make the rounds. They go on Funding Circle and they do a round, and then they do a round on AngelList, and they do a round on another platform. And so, and because each of those, it has basically a different audience of investors. And they get 200 grand here and 300 grand here, and then they go back to the first one. Because it's like a year later and they've made some more progress and they go back to the same investors. So and I only expect we'll see more of that.
I have two quick questions. The first one is, you talked about putting your business on the angel list and that helping people, but I'm guessing it's not just like I could be wrong, but it's not just like list something and then people find it, but it's more of an interactive process, like maybe slightly better than a cold email.
Yeah, it's AngelList is probably a bit of an art, and it itself changes over time. So you have to keep learning about how it's changing. And so basically, by putting it there are investors who watch that, and so you're kind of like, and you tag your company, like they're ones looking for new healthcare companies, right? Or looking for new ed tech companies or certain things like that. And so by putting the right tags on it, that you'll show up in their feed. They get a feed, and you can email newsletter of like, here are the new startups in your categories you're looking for, right? And they would see it that way. The other thing that you do is then you interact with your profile. It's much more like a LinkedIn profile or a Facebook page than a static page. And so people can like it, follow it, comment on it, things like that. And when they do that, just like on Facebook, other people get notified. So if I come in and I follow you on AngelList, or I leave a comment, then the people that follow me in their feed see Josh went and liked this other startup, right? And so you can hustle to go make that happen. And so somebody here, like one of the things they should do is they create their profile, and then they go network with all of the other people here at Capital Factory they can meet in person, and get all the mentors to go follow them and like comment on their profile and everything like that. And then, I've got 9,000 followers on AngelList. So if I go comment on your profile, then 9,000 other people get notified, right? And then they can kind of work that to go make things happen. AngelList has a concept of trending, which you can game just like anything else that would be trending. So it's like people do a lot of stuff to try to time when everybody all right, everybody follow my account right now, to try to make themselves go trending so that they see a lot of activity on their profile and things like that. So, but you have to work it. The people that I see that are really successful with AngelList, they don't like make a profile and put it up and it just goes. It's like a Kickstarter. Like the Kickstarters that work, people are like really sophisticated about and smart about and work their ass off on, and like those are the ones that are really successful. And I think it's like that with AngelList too.
And by the way, have a professional profile, because if you send me an unsolicited email and you're trying to pitch me on your idea, one of the first things I'm going to go do is find you on AngelList. In fact, make it easy for me. Just here's our profile on AngelList, and then you're going to have, it doesn't have to be super professionally produced video, but it should be well thought out. The messages in it should be important. You don't have to pay money to go into a studio necessarily, but do think about that. And also when investors, if you email me and I go, maybe interesting, send me your pitch deck. Okay, don't send me your pitch deck. Say, here's the link to my AngelList profile, and you're gonna have a video there, and you might have a 3 to 5 slide pitch deck that has a few things in there. But those are some of the other ways to use AngelList for sure.
Right. So I just have one more question. You were talking, kind of on his question, you were talking about not taking money from inexperienced investors. So I'm kind of, maybe I could save a personal question later, but and so my co-founder got an email from a friend who's looking to start, who's asking, do you angel invest? What companies are you investing in? And so we know, so I just found out he's looking to put $25,000 in companies, and he's saying it's not worth it because he's never invested before, and I say we should do it if he can make an introduction to someone else. But I think the concern would be that he's just never done it before, but he's a friend.
Yeah, so I mean,
I figured I could also say, like, just, you're not gonna be in, I don't know, just make the expectation.
Yeah, it kind of depends how desperate you are too. But you just, I think in that situation, the most important part would be don't let him lead it. So like you want to find someone else to do it and have them agree to the terms, as opposed to having a person who's not as experienced set the terms. Because that's where you get into trouble, is you go agree to something with that person, and you haven't done this before and they haven't done it before, and you agree to something that wasn't a good thing to agree to, and nobody had bad intentions, but like it just wasn't a good.
But I'm saying if it's not preferred stock, he doesn't really have any ability to ruin too much, does he?
No, but just saying there's
but if it's not preferred stock, you're probably screwing him over. So
well,
if he's your friend and your first investor, do you not want to give him?
is a convertible
Oh,
note.
well, okay, that would.
But still, there's terms in the note. What Josh
Yeah.
is saying is, he might push you to certain terms in that note, and then you go pitch George and me and others, and we went, what the hell are you talking about?
Yeah.
And let's say we cause you to agree to a different terms, now you gotta go back to him and go, oh. Now, maybe that's a conversation you can have, is like, let's agree conceptually that this, but these other terms, let's go find some other investors, and then we'll plug that in a little bit later. Or something.
Or you give them a note that says, you know, you're putting money in now, but we're not gonna define the terms except for maybe one or two general ones until other investors come in and we circle it through.
I need more friends like that.
You had mentioned about no business plans, the environment now. I've been working on one, so the 2 to 3 page, they're hard, yeah. The financials, like how much are you looking at financials, an ROI? You really want to see what the costs are and what the ROI is at the meetings or at that stage on the angel list.
It just depends how real it is. Like if they're real, they're great. But almost none of the companies we're talking to, it's just
Right.
complete bullshit. Like I mean,
Right.
they're just like
And
completely
that's
making
what
shit up. And so it's like, no, I don't spend any time looking at that. It's just like if you've got real unit economics, that's interesting. Which is not like projections. It's like, hey, here's what we learned. Like we did this and it cost us this much to acquire customers and this is what it costs us to deliver the service and like so our unit economics work. Like that can be useful kind of like economic, kind of financial stuff early on. If you have real projections that are really based on stuff, like that's great, but then you're gonna have to make people believe it. And just most of the companies we're working with, they wouldn't have any way to make any real financial projections.
This is one where, if there were 5 of us here, you probably would get 5 somewhat different answers, okay? There's some like Josh that either totally ignore it or maybe mostly ignore it. I barely look at it, but I'm gonna tell you kind of what questions I'm gonna ask, and then there's gonna be another one sitting next to me, and she's gonna actually drill into it a lot, right? So there's differences here. What I wanna look for is, do you understand the knobs and levers of your model? And the model is not just the financial model. The operational model feeds the financial model. So in your earliest days, it's actually the operational model. It's conversion metrics of visitors to trial downloads to convert to paid, and then later upsell to a more expensive version. Or it's, I'm using one example.
That's kind of what I meant by the unit economics.
That's right.
But
now that does feed a financial model, and the reason I like to see that feed is I want to see how you then convert all that into dollars. I like seeing that entrepreneurs understand the concept of a model, but what I'm going to ask you is, if you could crank one metric only up to 10 from 3, which one is it? And I want to see you. Is it raw leads? Is it that conversion rate right there? Is it so that just shows me a basic understanding of your model, because like Josh says, I barely even look at the numbers at the bottom of the model, okay? The second thing I like to see out of a model is to just play a little bit of what if. Or what's it going to take? What's it going to take for you to get to a $10 million company? Like, what is a $10 million company for what you do? Is it 1 million customers paying, this much each and this churn rate? I just like to see a few scenarios of like, so where's the $1 million scenario? Where's the 10 million? Because in my mind, I'm trying to figure out, okay, how does this get to 100 million or something? So I'm looking at it for those kind of things. It's like, what did you learn and what do you understand of the model more than the numbers that are spitting out? But do understand, there's going to be a woman sitting right here or a man sitting right here that takes it extremely important.
Well, that's kind of what I
that
heard
person
from
will never be
CTAN,
one of the
so
ones that
that's
write the
why I
first
was
checks.
like-
And they might not write the first check, or they'll take you through,
the
8 rounds of due
the
diligence.
nature of that person is they probably won't be one of the early.
And the other thing is, the earlier you are, the less important this is, right? As soon as you start connecting some dots, and when you go to a Series A, all of a sudden, it's definitely more important.
Yeah.
And also,
And a
you're
Series B, it's totally
way important.
Like the Series B investors, that's when they're investing, is because now your model is based on something and does make sense.
That's right. And the projection horizons change too. So if you're raising $1 million on a seed round and you do have some history, kind of showing a 12-month financial model, I might actually geek out with you a little bit on it. Like if you've had some number of quarters, as you're going to raise a Series A, they're going to want to see a 2-year model, maybe a 3-year, and as you're raising more, so all of that changes as your company evolves.
C10 requires 4 years of projections.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
but they have different kinds of businesses too, though. They have people that are very different, very businesses where that's totally appropriate, but probably not as much for a startup. And that's why C10 typically isn't investing in really early stage companies that can't produce that kind of projection. Anybody not asked one yet? Just make sure we're getting all the way around. go right back over.
Comment and then a question, actually. Have you looked into running lean or the lean startup as well?
Yeah.
Have you gone to any of the lean startup meetings here at the Capital Factory? They're fantastic.
Great. They are great, yeah.
So that was my comment.
Yeah, startup grind, lean
Yeah.
startup, they're awesome.
So Capital Factory's been killing it for a while, and my introduction really to everything here has been the Lean Startup Meetup, Music Tech Meetup, South by Southwest Gaming, and the various other, game-related meetup groups that happen here, including ATX Mobile and Video Game Majors Unite. I'm curious, what goals does Capital Factory have to essentially grow Capital Factory in 2016 and grow the startup community? And what kind of challenges do you foresee kind of overcoming in this year?
Good questions. Our general path is to keep doing what we're doing. Like, it's working, it's growing,
2009.
Austin's growing and scaling, and I think, our model's baking. And so we're that part seems to be working. We're still a startup too, though, as well, so we're always changing. So, I'm sure there'll be lots of new things that get announced this year that we figure out or plan, and the space part of the business is its own whole other thing that's always changing. So yeah, I don't know if I have any really huge announcements or anything, but every year seems to just keep getting bigger. In fact, it's like bigger and more stuff going on, and we keep taking more space and keep working with more companies and there's more mentors, and the quality of the companies coming in seems to keep going up. So
there's nothing about the calendar year here really that forces us into a special planning mode. You could say, because we have a venture fund, there are cycles on venture funds, and so there's a horizon for where we have a certain amount of runway to continue making investments, and as that horizon shortens, that forces us into kind of a planning cycle on, hey, what do we want to do next with that? But that's Josh described the two sides of our business, so there's probably a cadence around what do we want to be when we grow up, kind of thinking on the fund side that is driven around life cycle of a fund, but that's different than the rest of the Capital Factory business.
Okay, self-serving, came in here for one thing, got it, thank you, great presentation. But I don't know if you saw the light bulb go off
Hey
a
ma'am,
minute ago.
don't forget your coat.
Oh, thank
Yeah,
you so
yeah.
much for saying that. I noticed as soon as I stepped out.
Okay.
I've been working with nonprofits for 25 years, asking for money and raising it for some of the least appetizing missions on the planet. It has never crossed my mind to raise money to make money. And when I heard you say the word team a few minutes ago, I was like, holy fuck. I would be priceless to somebody who didn't know what I did, but I don't know anything about their craft. Where do I need to be to meet teams? Big game changer for me suddenly.
Yeah, there's a meetup here once a month called the Co-Founder Meetup, and so that's people looking for people to join their team or help them. Partly just what? Next Monday. Partly just networking. There's a lot of different ways to do that, but that might be coming to other meetups where these types of people will be, because there's 3 different meetups here every day, or being a member or like hanging out with stuff. And then one of my favorite places is at weekend hackathons. There's one here in Austin called 3-Day Startup. There's another one called Startup Weekend. There's other variations on these types of like lock-ins or hackathons, but those tend to very much self-select towards people that are looking to join a startup or be part of one, and it's a great environment where you get to really kind of try people out in a way that's more real than meeting them in a coffee shop. You get to work with them on the project and see what it's like, and so that's also a really good place to see who you want to work with.
Am I right that there's actually a role for me, which never crossed my mind until?
Not sure. I'm not sure that that startup fundraising is going to be similar to nonprofit fundraising, but maybe. I don't know. I don't know.
You have to ask for money at the end, and that is
Yeah.
that is a skill.
I do it all day, every day,
that is a
dollars.
skill, yeah. Right.
A lot of entrepreneurs actually have trouble uttering the words at the end, so we'll go through a great meeting, and then I'll be able to if I want to wiggle out of there, I'll be okay, great to meet you, and we'll shake hands, and I'll go away. And I never got the question, So that's probably a skill you have, but a lot of the rest, there's a lot of others that you might.
Yeah, or it might be putting together the proproposal, like even helping them to.
I'm good at finding traction,
Yeah.
metrics, and I ask for the check or keep talking until they pay me to leave.
It's a good strategy.
So I guess to go back to the question of metrics, working on a B2B software startup right now, and you know, we finished version 1 of our sales funnel and have a small amount of money, and we're preparing to do a small scale media buy on Facebook and LinkedIn. So I'm just curious, you know, if I were to come to you after that media buy, what ballpark, what specific conversion rates or return on ad spend or anything like that would you be looking for, you know, to see that I hopefully successfully proved a concept? I guess that's what I'm curious about.
Well, I'm gonna look at, so first I'm gonna expect that you ran more than one experiment. So
Yeah.
if you shot everything into one Facebook campaign, that's one thing. I'd actually prefer it if you did it 3 times and either did 3 different ones, or you did it once and then you iterated a time or 2, because you learn a lot. And then I'm gonna look at just your understanding of the economics of your cost to acquire that fill in the blank. I don't, you know, so you said B2B.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you're gonna convert all these into paying customers, or these are gonna convert into pipeline opportunities, but you know, some semblance of you understanding what it costs to acquire that lead, and then what it also incrementally costs to convert it into a paying customer, and when should you expect to get a return on investment, a payback against that customer.
Mhm.
I do understand that it'll improve over time, so it, you know, if you tell me, if you're a SaaS business with a recurring revenue model, and you say that kind of based on this very small scale, looks like I'm getting payback in about 15 months or 18 months, I'm not gonna freak out. That's better than 3 years or 5 years. So it's that level of understanding, you know, kind of that I'm looking for. I'm not looking for you to spend a lot of money. I'd rather you try a couple different channels, and then try 2 or 3 experiments within those channels first.
Cool.
With most of the companies that we're dealing with, the stage that they're at, and the type of thing they're doing, they're often building something that's never been built before. So the question for me is often more about will anybody use it than can you sell it. I mean, they're both really important. But for most of the company, and also like Gordon said, I would expect your customer acquisition costs are gonna go down over time and improve over time as you learn how to do that. Typically, when you do that at the beginning, it's very inefficient, and you don't know the right, there's 20 different channels to try, and you don't know the right ones, and like, so I actually wouldn't expect to see really great numbers on, we spent this much money and this was our conversion rate or things like that. What I'm usually looking for at that stage is more, I don't really care what the conversion rate was, but we got enough people to sign up, a critical mass of like a statistically significant sample of people using it, and they really liked it. And those people were highly engaged and sticky and kept using it. Because if they really liked it, then I'm gonna believe you can get more people. And more often, now if you do happen to be able to go test it, and you can show, hey, look, actually we can acquire people really cheap. That's still really good. If you can show, like, actually on our first test, like, we can acquire people really cheap and their lifetime value is good, and maybe your product, that's not the question, so it's like, nope, we know the value of a user, it's this, and we can acquire more less, and that's great, that's still really good. But most of the companies I'm talking to, that's not the stage they're at. It's not at, how do I optimize my customer acquisition to get my costs down? It's, if I drive people to, I know I can spend money to get people to go use this. If I do that, are they really gonna use it? And are they really gonna be good customers?
What kind of due diligence checks do you do before you invest in a company? And also, what sort of perceptions do you have on entrepreneurs that have failed previously?
I always look for a British accent first. That's my number one checkbox. So you're there. I mean, that's like Gordon said about, you know, different the financial stuff. You're going to find that varies dramatically for different investors, both just on personal style and how they approach it and where they like to invest and what stage. For me, I'm way at the way early side of it. That's why I do this, right? And so I'm really generally meeting companies that there's very little due diligence to do because they haven't done that much yet, so there's not that much to look at. So for me, it's really about the people, and I just get to know the people, and do I really connect with them and believe in them? I obviously have to still believe in the space and the product and what they're doing too, and it's really a very emotional, personal thing. So for me, it's a short number of meetings. I said most people don't meet you and just invest. I actually usually know at the first meeting if I'm going to invest or not, because for me it's so, I don't usually just do it then, but like I know really early because it's usually a very, very personal thing. And a lot of other investors, it's going to be very, very different. And they're gonna have different thresholds of like what stage they like to invest in. Like I want to be the first person that invested. That's like I like to take pride in that. That's like I'm like like I want to be. I wrote them the first check. So by default, by definition, I am not doing as much due diligence as other people and not looking at as much stuff. And then other people want to be the last check. And that's probably smarter. But and they might be looking at a bunch more stuff. A lot of investors, angel investors in particular, are primarily looking at who else invested.
Okay.
That's part of the due diligence. They call that social proof. And that's part of what Capital Factory is actually engineered to create. That's part of this whole matching model is like you come in and you get introduced to the kinds of people who will write the first check and you get 2 of them to do it. And now you can say, look, I got them 2. And then we match that with some of our stuff, we match it with some others, and now it looks like a party. And now other people are like, wow, all those other people invested? Okay, maybe I should look at that. So that's what we're trying to do is help kind of create that momentum. So that's another thing a lot of people look at. And then Gordon probably looks at a lot more than I do, so I'll let him.
It's not a lot. I don't mind writing the first check, but I probably do more due diligence than Josh. I wanna feel like you're solving a problem. Like, are you really solving a problem? And second, is it a problem that needs to be solved? So there are people out there solving problems that I can't be convinced truly need to be solved.
Okay.
So I focus a lot on that. Is it really a problem? How do you know it's a problem? Is it like a kind of a problem or a really burning problem, and does it need to be solved? And I do a lot of due diligence on the team. And I don't have a problem if you had an opportunity that didn't work out previously. I don't call it a failure because that's something that you did. It didn't work out, so that's not a failure. But what I want to know is, what did you learn from that? And it's not a punishment, don't ever do that again, because a lot of those, you'll never be faced with that again. So it's like, are you the type to learn in ways that you can adapt that learning to this new thing that you're doing? And then I'm also looking at, especially if there's co-founders, one of the most common things that have caused a few of my investments to go to zero have been co-founder funk that spun the company out of control. They just go left versus go right, and they fought about it for long enough, and then maybe they separated, maybe they didn't, but actually it's one of the most common causes of a startup having to dissolve is this funk between founders. So and it doesn't, you didn't have to be best friends with this person since elementary school. That might actually not be a good thing, right? If you're close friends, that actually can be a bad thing. So I just want to, and that's why I want to meet with both of you for a while. I'm assuming if there is 2, because I want to kind of see how you play off each other, and just is it kind of a good vibe here? Those are some keys that I'm looking at.
Thank you.
Investors who are smarter than me do reference checks.
Okay.
They're going to talk to people who have worked with you. They're going to call, if you have customers, they're going to want to talk to a customer and have them talk about how they used it and see it. Things like that. Some other.
Thank you.
What's the typical arrangement for Capital Factory companies with regards to advisors? You mentioned there's agreement. I mean, what is it typically, equity or just what is the?
So there's a typical, and then
I'm sure
there's lots of exceptions
the string,
in different situations. The typical thing is, and we have kind of a template, is an advisor comes on, it's a 1-year agreement where they're gonna work pretty intensely for the first year, and then typically it falls off pretty much after that. And they're typically getting 1% common stock as equity vesting over that year. And sometimes it's 0.5%, sometimes it's 2%, depends on how the demand is for that mentor. Like if they're a really badass mentor, they might be able to command a higher percentage, or you might not need as much of their time, so they might take a smaller amount. But it's gonna be generally in that range. There are mentors who end up engaging with one company where they end up really working for the company 1 or 2 days a week. And then they might get either a much more significant equity stake or get paid in addition to what they're doing. But it's really more like they're becoming an employee or something at that point.
Are they typically also investors too, or not?
Often.
Okay.
It varies a lot.
Right.
It's time commitment, it's the length of the term of the contract, and it's their specific expertise. You have some in our network that are just royal badasses in certain areas, and you'd pay anything to get her for this opportunity, versus other ones that are just really smart and haven't done a lot. So those are kind of I look at those 3 factors, kind of the.
Or has a very specific expertise. I need your help with this thing. You're gonna help me optimize my inbound marketing program, versus I just want to be able to talk to you whenever anything comes up because you're kind of my consigliere, kind of thing.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
So from an equity play perspective, if you're building a team, what is there a guideline or something you recommend? I've seen so many different recommendations out there on how you should divvy up equity and with your team members. Is there something you recommend to look at, aside from the books?
There's no right answer. I have like a 5-minute video on my YouTube that's like, that says like, look, here's 5 different ways to think about it. And it's all obvious things. It's like, well, either it's like we split it 50-50, or it's 90 me and 10% you, or it's 10% you and 90%. You know, it's like, there's only so many ways to cut it up, and then you can talk about what the justifications are for those. I'd say, the biggest thing I would say is, my goal would be to find somebody who I can make an equal partner. That's the best situation. Obviously, they have to be worth it. That's part of what makes that the best situation. But
So if the company executes and they achieve their target revenue 3-5 years down the road, what would you consider that revenue to be too small to invest in? If you're saying you're expecting to make $1 million, 5, 10, 15, 20, 100 million, well, what's too small for you guys?
it's just not that simple.
No.
I mean, it's just, there's so many different kinds of businesses, and they have different revenue goals and different ways to be valued different ways. Look, I mean, in general, if you want to, taking a step back, most of the companies that we're seeing want to go get venture capital funding. So let's just not assume it's not just you're going to get angel funding and then stop, which might make that number lower. But most of them, they think they're getting angel funding and then they're going to go get venture funding. If you're going to get venture funding, it's pretty safe to say you should have a line of sight, like you have a vision of how you become a $100 million revenue business in some period of time, less than 10 years. Faster is better. But like, and why? That's the threshold where you can IPO. That's a business that can IPO. Now, and that's which means could become a $1 billion business. So most investors want to see that it has the possibility to become a $1 billion business because that kind of makes it fit into their math model. Now, as the cost of doing these startups goes down and companies can raise less money, as an angel investor, I'm okay investing in a company that I think is going to raise $1 million from angels and then never raise venture capital money and then might only sell for $10 million or $20 million. But that could work. If they only raise $1 million, they don't have to become a $100 million company or a $1 billion company. They can become a $20 million company and everybody can get rich. Everybody can be happy. But you have to understand what everyone's goals are and what the possibilities are for the market. And if that is the case, that company better not raise $5 million because then they're screwed. Like, it's probably the time for one more question.
What you just said is kind of against the conventional Silicon Valley wisdom, right? Of like, if you're going to raise angel or anything, you have to be a potential $1 billion plus valuation company. Is that not the case in Austin or outside of the Valley, or I guess?
Well,
for you
I mean,
personally?
like I was trying to start saying, that's the case if you want to raise venture capital money, which most of the ones in Silicon Valley you're talking about do, then they do. It does need to be a $1 billion business. But I was saying, and you'll find different angel investors will have different things. Personally, I wouldn't have a problem. I mean, I'm an investor, like I said, in some restaurants or other things. They're just different types of businesses. And so you have different expectations. They have different risk profiles. My point was that because it's possible to create some businesses on much less capital, it might be that they can raise a much smaller amount of money and still create a meaningful business. And if you raise a lot less, then there's a lot less people to pay back. So it doesn't have to become quite as big of a business for lots of people to make money. The founder, you could be a founder of a small company and it might only, get it to $3 million in revenue and sell it for $10 million. And, you can put $5 million in your pocket and that's pretty life-changing for a lot of people. And then your investors might have put in $1 million and they might get $5 million back or $4 million back. That's 4x on their money. That's pretty good, like in 5 years or something like that. Like that's a good deal for everybody. A VC would be super pissed. They'd be like, even if it's a good multiple, it doesn't fit their business model. But angel investors have the ability to do that kind of thing, and so they'd be more flexible. All right, great. That's probably where we should wrap up for today. I hope you found that helpful. Thank you all for coming, and grab a T-shirt on the way out if you would like one, and.
Scott, Peter, talk tomorrow. Just hope you get some time with you.